Up next, Fascism in America, the essential May Brussell. It's an incredible story, and also the covert war against rock. Alex Constantine back on Coast to Coast next. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Alex Constantine is an American author, investigative journalist, online editor of the Constantine Report. You should spend some time daily going to that report. His work focuses on world fascism, political corruption, organized crime. His books have provided the premise for several BBC documentaries. Back several years ago, he was a featured speaker before a standing room only crowd at the Congressional Black Caucus's annual Brain Trust Conference. In 2009, he hosted a program that aired on French television about opposition to the Vietnam War. One of his books explored the possibility that O.J. Simpson was framed for murder by the mob and the police, resulting in Simpson's 1994 arrest and trial. We're going to be talking with Alex about a lot of issues tonight on Coast to Coast. Alex, good to have you back. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. It's good to be here.
Let me tell you something. Your website is probably one of the best I have seen in a long, long time. It's almost like a book. Once you open it up, you can't put it down.
Thank you. That's gratifying to hear, actually. It has over 9,000 entries, many of them dealing with political assassinations. And you can get on it and pretty much follow your notes with the index at the bottom of the home page, and you'll be busy for months.
You know, Alex, on this program, we really dig in to find the truth. You know, some people will accuse us, you're conspiracy theorists, you're doing this and that. I just want to get to the bottom of things that happen. It just seems to me, and this is since I was 13 years old during the JFK assassination, that everything we're told is not the case. It's not the truth. Have you found that out too?
Well, I wouldn't say everything. I mean, we get a smattering of information, usually in the middle of the night, but very little leaks through, I've found. And when I began a book called Virtual Government back in the mid-'90s, I wanted to start with an explanation so that my information would go down a little bit easier with the reader. So I began to dig in the interactions of the CIA and the media and discovered Operation Mockingbird. I did a search on the Internet and found no mention of it anywhere. So I thought, I better dig into this subject, and then it'll be a little easier on my readers. So I started to explore Operation Mockingbird and discovered that there were thousands of journalists around the world who were working for the CIA. But way back in 1977, there was a researcher by the name of Sean Gervasi who found that he did an audit of the CIA's books and discovered that 1/3 of their budget was devoted to propaganda. So you have an American electorate now who's obsessed with sports and belly button pop music, really doesn't pay attention too much to politics, deep politics. And so they're pretty much distracted, and the media really don't help much because they keep it very superficial.
Now, when you got involved in looking at organized crime, political assassinations, coups, the CIA, how did you do that? I mean, what was that catalyst for you that made you jump into this?
Well, I started out your stereotypical nattering academic nabob and moved to Los Angeles in the early 1980s, hoping to make a career out of writing plays and short stories and novels. Yeah. But I had edited a newspaper in Central Ohio and had done some investigative work and started to get the itch to do some more. So I found out about a trial in San Francisco that involved a cult who had murdered a homeless guy, tortured him to death all night, cannibalized parts of his body. And there were members of this cult who had ties across the bay to wealthy corporations and individuals and the CIA, and I began to ask a lot of questions about this stuff. So I went up and attended the trial, and one of the central participants in this murder had a swastika tattooed on his face. He'd escaped a Canadian prison, joined this cult operation, and I had a lot of questions about that murder, but I wrote up a short article for the LA Weekly and then spent the next month or so just following up the leads, and I ran up a phone bill about $500 a month, just calling calling police departments around the country and gathering information on cults, and pretty much I discovered that the CIA kept recurring in these stories. And so I began to look into CIA mind control and started forays into organized crime because there were mafia connections, and found that there were judges involved in this stuff and lots of prominent people. And after about 6 months of this, I was totally obsessed. And then I turned on the radio one day and heard Mae Brussell on the air discovering some of the same cases that I was writing about at the time. So to lay a foundation for meeting her, I contacted some cult victims in San Francisco and had them get in touch with her. And she was excited to hear from them and interviewed them and got their accounts down on videotape. And I kept listening and ordered her information, sent her information. And the next thing you knew, she had cancer and she was dead. And I was totally devastated because the only person on earth who seemed to be on the same track that I was on was suddenly dead. So I ran up to Monterey where her show broadcast and talked to the producer, and he put me on the air. And before I knew it, I was in the same time slot doing the same sort of work, trying to pick up where she had left off. But, of course, she had much more experience than I did. But that was 26 years ago, and I've been doing it ever since.
That's right. And there's some people who may not know who she was, Alex. She was a local broadcaster in the Los Angeles area. Right. Southern California. She, died at the age of 66, as you say, cancer, and she was heavily into the assassination of President Kennedy, the history of fascism. I wonder what got her going.
It was a Kennedy assassination. She was watching the tube one day, ironing her clothes, her family's clothes, and watching TV, and she happened to catch Jack Ruby shooting Lee Harvey Oswald, and the whole thing looked a little fishy to her. And she began to look into the Kennedy assassination, ordered all 26 volumes of the Warren Commission report, began to pull names out of it, cross-referenced the names, and ended up with 26,000 pages of notes cross-referencing all the information in the Warren Commission report. And she did that for 6 or 7 years before she ever went public with her findings. In fact, she broke out really when Watergate occurred. She saw the notice in the Washington Post because she'd been following the press and doing open source research at the time. And she caught the names of several Cubans who were involved in the Watergate break-in and recognized the names from the Kennedy assassination. The Cubans hailed from a group called Operation 40, which was Richard Nixon's black bag and assassinations team, and you never really even heard of it until the Church Committee came along.
Well, that's true.
You never heard about the assassinations for various reasons that I write about in my next book. But she recognized the names and started to cross-reference Watergate and ended up with a massive article that she published in The Realist. Paul Krasner published that publication, and John Lennon financed it. He threw in $5,000 for the publication of May's article.